The old workshop stood at the edge of the village, where the rice fields ended and the bamboo trees began. Its wooden walls were faded by sun and time, and the smell inside was a mix of sawdust, oil, and quiet memories. Mr. Hean, now 73, sat alone at his bench, sharpening a chisel that no longer cut as smooth as it used to. His hands were slower, but still sure. For 50 years he had carved tables for the village. Big ones, small ones, wedding tables, altar tables, all shaped by these same hands. But now, no one asked. Young couples bought furniture from factories, steel legs, plastic tops, faster, cheaper. His name, once spoken with admiration, now echoed only in the minds of the elders. That morning, Mr. Hean opened the back of his shed and pulled out a forgotten slab of red narrowwood, rare, heavy, and filled with golden veins. He had saved it since the war, not for a client, for something meaningful. He placed it on the bench gently, like setting down an old photo. "Just one more," he whispered. "Not to sell, not to show, but to remember, to leave something behind before time swept everything away. If you've ever watched the world change too fast and held on to something old just to feel steady again, this story is for you." Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every grain of wood carries a memory worth keeping. Mr. Hean looked around the workshop. The tools hanging on the walls weren't just tools, they were stories. That hammer was his father's. That plane, he had borrowed it from his teacher and never gave it back. The floor still carried marks from when he dropped his first carving by mistake. As he ran his hand along the wood, he felt it breathe under his fingers. This table wouldn't just hold cups of tea. It would hold laughter, mourning, secrets, lives. "One more," he repeated, and he picked up the chisel. If you feel the same, that the most beautiful things are made not by machines but by memory, subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and join us as we follow the hands that remember. Mr. Hean always believed the legs of a table were its foundation, not just in structure, but in story. They touched the ground, after all, the same earth where generations had walked, worked, and waited. He began with the first leg, carving it square and steady, like the houses in the village when he was a boy. No electricity, just lanterns at night. He could still hear the laughter of children playing with bamboo sticks in the yard while their parents shared tea on the porch. His chisel moved slow, but sure. That leg carried the spirit of the past, the part of the village that had vanished, but still lived inside him. The second leg he shaped rounder, smoother, like the years after the war, when things were hard, but people leaned on each other more. He remembered carving a table for a couple who had nothing but hope. They paid him with rice, and he smiled as if it were gold. He paused and ran his hand along the new leg, still warm from the carving. If you've ever held on to pieces of the past, not because they were perfect, but because they were real, this is your kind of story. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and stay with us as we carve what truly matters. The third leg he made thinner, more graceful, like his daughter when she left for the city. That leg held distance, but also pride. She now worked in an office, wore clean white shirts, and typed on computers. But when she visited, she still kissed his hands before leaving. And the fourth leg? He paused for a long time before beginning. It would be the present, the now. Strong, but not without cracks. He carved it carefully, letting the blade follow the grain instead of forcing it. Like life, like aging. The four legs, when finished, didn't match perfectly, but they stood balanced. Just like the village, changing, uneven, but still standing. If you believe beauty comes from what's lived, not what's flawless, then subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every carving is a memory with weight. Mr. Heian placed the wide slab of narrow wood on the frame, running his fingers slowly across its surface. The top of a table. It wasn't just a place to hold things. It was where life unfolded. He remembered this clearly. The night his son-in-law brought a roasted duck and spilled fish sauce all over his old table, and how they laughed until their cheeks hurt. Or the quiet mornings when his wife Lan sat across from him sipping tea, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, saying nothing, yet saying everything. The tabletop had heard more than words. It had heard secrets whispered after midnight, stories of heartbreak, prayers mumbled under breath before meals. This new surface, though still raw, would one day hold its own stories. And as he sanded it, smoothing every groove, he whispered to it, like an old friend, "You will remember for me when I no longer can." If you've ever looked at a piece of furniture in your home and thought of the people who sat there, the lives lived around it, then this story belongs to you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and let these stories find a home in your heart. He chose not to stain the wood. He wanted its natural colors, soft browns, golden lines, faint red undertones, to speak for themselves. It reminded him of the land, not polished, not uniform, but honest. The wood had knots, tiny imperfections, but that made it real, alive. When he finally set the tabletop in place and stood back, it almost looked like it was listening, waiting for voices, waiting for stories. In that moment, Mr. Heian didn't feel old. He felt useful, rooted, like the table. And he smiled, not for anyone else, just for himself. If your heart is stirred by the quiet beauty of things made with hands, love, and memory, subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. Because some surfaces don't just reflect light, they reflect life. The drawer wasn't part of the original plan. Mr. Heian added it late in the process, almost on impulse. Just a small one, hidden under the tabletop, with no handle, only a thin groove. He carved it from old jackfruit wood, soft, fragrant, easy to work with. But as his hands shaped the drawer's frame, he wasn't thinking of utility. He was thinking of the letter. Folded inside a silk handkerchief, yellowed with time, it had been tucked away in a wooden box for decades. It was a letter from his brother, written during the war, never delivered. A letter filled with pain, regret, and hope. Mr. Heian had read it only once, the day he found it buried with a box of old tools in the attic of his father's home. Since then, it stayed hidden. Not forgotten, but not forgiven either. And now, as he slid the drawer into place, he knew what it was for. Not to be opened often, just to rest, to let the past have its place. Not on a shrine, not in silence, but inside something he built with love. If you've ever carried something unspoken, a memory, a letter, a regret, and longed for a way to honor it without speaking, this story is yours. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow the quiet truth that lives in wood. The drawer clicked shut. Perfect fit. No one would notice it unless they were searching. And maybe, one day, they would. Maybe his granddaughter, curious and careful, would pull it open and read the words. Or maybe not. Maybe it was enough just to know the letter wasn't hidden in shame, but held in peace. Mr. Heian sat down beside the table. The room was quiet. A rooster crowed in the distance, and the warm wind carried the scent of guava. The past hadn't disappeared. It had found a home, and that was enough. If you believe that healing doesn't always come through talking, but sometimes through carving. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because wood remembers what we sometimes try to forget. He hadn't planned to build a bench, but once the table stood finished, legs solid, surface smooth, drawer quietly in place, Mr. Hyen felt something missing. A table, no matter how beautiful, is only complete when someone sits beside it. And so, with soft wood and an even softer heart, he began to carve a long bench. Just enough space for two people. But it was never meant for two. It was meant for her. Lan, his wife of 42 years, gone now for 7. She used to sit by him every morning, drinking tea while he sanded planks in the open air. She never said much about the wood, but she always smiled when he wiped his hands on his apron and brought her a cup with both hands. "You treat me like I'm made of porcelain," she used to tease. "No," he'd reply, "like you're the last thing in the world that matters." He didn't cry often, but as he shaped the curve of the bench, he caught himself wiping his eyes more than the dust. If you've ever carved something, not because it was needed, but because your heart had no other way to speak, then you're not alone. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every story is shaped by love that lingers. The bench wasn't ornate. Simple lines, clean grain, no backrest, just a place to pause, a space to remember. When it was done, Mr. Hyen set it beside the table, then stepped back. The morning light filtered through the slats in the window, and for a moment, he could almost see her there, fingers wrapped around a cup, bare feet brushing the floor. A presence not loud, but full. That was her way. That bench, he knew, would never be sat on by strangers, maybe not even by family, but it was hers, and that was enough. If you've ever kept a seat beside you, not for the world to see, but for the heart to feel, then this is your place. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and honor the beauty of things and people that never leave us. It came quickly, as summer rains often do in the countryside. One moment, Mr. Hyen was brushing the last layer of oil onto the tabletop, the scent of citrus and wood rising into the still air. The next, thunder. Low and distant at first, then louder, closer. A wind swept through the open door, lifting the thin curtains, and with it, a smell he knew too well, wet soil, about to become flood. "No," he whispered, not out of fear for himself, but for the table. The wood was still fresh, not sealed enough to resist heavy rain. If it soaked in water now, the grain would swell, the drawer would stick. The memories trapped inside might never breathe again. He rushed to cover it, dragging an old tarp from the corner, his body stiff but moving with the urgency of youth. Rain hit the tin roof like a drumbeat of warning. He covered the table just in time, water dripping down his back. And then the lights flickered. Power cut. Only the sound of rain. And in that moment of darkness, with thunder outside and silence inside, he lit the old oil lamp. Its flame small, flickering, but steady. Like him. If you've ever stood alone with something you loved, willing to protect it with everything you had, then you understand. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every carving has its storm and its fire. He sat beside the bench, soaked to the skin, watching the water run down the walls. The flame cast long shadows across the workshop, turning tools into silhouettes, and the bench into a memory. And in that flickering light, he thought of every table he'd ever made. None had names, but all had purpose. This one held everything. The past, the regrets, the love, the silence, and now, the storm. When the rain finally eased, dawn broke through the clouds in golden streaks. The tarp had held. The table was safe. Mr. Hyen stood slowly, joints aching, heart full. Not because the table was perfect, but because it had survived. If that speaks to your soul, that beauty worth keeping is beauty that's endured. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. There's fire in the quiet places, and stories that never fade. He didn't expect anyone that morning. The rain had passed, the floor still damp with muddy footprints, and Mr. Hien was polishing the bench once more. Not out of necessity, but out of care. That's when he heard the voice. Small, unsure. Ong oi, can I watch you carve? It was Min, the boy from the house down the hill. Just 10, always barefoot, always asking questions. Mr. Hien turned, surprised, and smiled. You can watch, but only if you promise to listen more than you talk. Min nodded quickly, his eyes wide. He watched for a long time. As Mr. Hien sharpened the blade, tested it on the grain, made a line so fine it looked like a shadow. Then, something shifted. Mr. Hien picked up his oldest chisel, the one his own father had used, and without a word, handed it to Min. The boy hesitated. It's okay, Mr. Hien said. The wood doesn't fear small hands, only careless ones. Slowly, under the old man's gaze, the boy pressed into the soft wood. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that moment, 2 hands, 2 generations, something passed between them that no language could fully hold. If you've ever hoped that something you've made will outlive you, not in a museum, but in someone else's hands, then you understand. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and witness how craft becomes legacy. Min came back the next day, and the next. He swept the floor. He asked about every tool. He listened to the stories etched into every scar of Mr. Hien's hands. One afternoon, the boy asked, Will you teach me everything? Mr. Hien chuckled. No one knows everything, but I'll teach you what matters. He looked at the table, the legs, the bench, the drawer, the storm, the stillness. Then at the boy. We don't carve wood just to shape it, he said softly. We carve it to remember who we are. If you believe that passing down a craft is one of the last beautiful ways to pass down a soul, subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. Because sometimes all it takes to keep a tradition alive is one hand letting go of the chisel and one hand reaching for it. The day Mr. Hien placed the finished table outside his shop, something strange happened. The road, usually filled with motorbikes, vendors shouting, children chasing kites, fell quiet. Not because of rain, not because of any festival, but because people stopped. One by one, neighbors came out of their homes. Some had grown up watching Mr. Hien work in that very spot. Some had never spoken to him, but had eaten meals on tables he made. That morning, they came, not for wood, but for memory. They ran their hands across the tabletop, tracing its grains like reading a story carved into silence. Min stood close to the bench, proud, though still unsure of where to put his hands. An old man from the other end of the village whispered, He carved his whole life into this. And perhaps he had. The letter in the drawer, the seat for Lan, the storm that came and went, and the chisel passed down. It was all there, not visible in the way a painting screams its beauty, but in the way a breath stills when you remember your mother's voice, or the way your father wiped sawdust from your eyes when you were a child. If you've ever wished that time could pause, even just once, to honor someone who gave their life to something quiet, steady, and beautiful, then this is your story too. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and help keep these moments alive. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a photographer from the district came. He didn't ask much, just took a photo. Mr. Hien, standing beside the table, one hand on Min's shoulder. The next week, that image hung in the town hall. Below it, a small plaque. The last table maker of the old village. But Mr. Hien never came to see it. He didn't need to. His legacy wasn't on the wall. It sat in the hands of a boy. In the bench that held his wife's memory. In the drawer that kept his brother's words. And in the silence of that one perfect day. If this story moved your heart, even just a little, subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because stories like these are carved once, but remembered forever.